There is a level of strength that when a human reaches it, they no longer need to prove anything. They do not need to speak loud. They do not need to prove themselves. They do not need to defeat anyone. Just by being present, the air around them changes. Because their existence unintentionally exposes all the weaknesses, hesitation, and delays that others have spent their whole lives trying to hide. That strength does not come from muscles, and it does not come from motivation or temporary inspiration. It is not built by inspirational quotes, but by a process that is much more severe. Removing dependency, removing the habit of negotiating with oneself, and removing the ego that always finds a reason to stop when things become uncomfortable. 400 years ago, in Tokugawa, Japan, there was a man who walked that path all the way. He was not the strongest, nor the fastest or the most aggressive, but he never lost a single duel in his entire life. Not because he was superior to others, but because he never exposed a single weakness in his own mind. His name was Miyamoto Musashi. In this video, you will not hear vague philosophies or empty encouragement. You will not be told that you should believe in yourself or think more positively. Instead, you will be guided through the layers of mental and physical strength that Musashi left behind. A path not meant for the majority, because it forces a person to give up comfort in exchange for the ability to stand firm in any circumstance. If right now you already sense that this content is not for those seeking entertainment, if you understand that this is the path of discipline, endurance, and self-mastery, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what comes next is not meant to make you feel more comfortable, but to turn you into a person who is no longer easily broken by life. Most people today do not collapse because of major events. They collapse silently, bit by bit, through the small choices repeated every day. They have good intentions, a clear plan, even motivation, but when it is time to act, they hesitate, they delay, and they convince themselves that tomorrow will be a more suitable time. There was a man like that. He was not a catastrophic failure in the eyes of society. He had a family, a stable job, responsibilities, but inside, he always carried a sense of weakness that he did not dare to name. Every morning, he promised he would change, be more disciplined, be stronger, and every night, he went to sleep with the same unfinished promise. He was not lacking knowledge. He knew how to eat, how to train, how to control his emotions. The problem was not that he did not know. The problem was that he only acted when everything was favorable. When he was tired, he skipped it. When he was stressed, he avoided it. When things got hard, he waited for inspiration to return. Over time, his mind got used to stepping back. Every delay, every small giving up, taught the brain a dangerous lesson, that discomfort is something to avoid. And when the mind has learned that lesson long enough, it begins to react even to pressures that are not life-threatening. This became most apparent in moments when he lost control. A tense meeting, criticism from his boss, an argument at home. His heart raced, his breath became heavy, his mind went blank, not because the situation was truly dangerous, but because his nervous system had never been trained to endure inconvenience and face stress. When the first panic attack appeared, he finally realized the truth he had always avoided before. His problem was not a lack of motivation, but a lack of ability to stand firm under pressure. His body reacted as if facing a deadly threat, while in reality it was only discomfort. And from that moment, a question began to form, quietly but impossible to ignore. If he continued living like this, how many more times would he give up on himself? Miyamoto Musashi did not begin his path by seeking strength. He began by recognizing a truth that very few people dared to face. People are not weak because they lack ability, but because they carry too many unnecessary things, too many habits, too many conditions, too many dependencies that make every action require permission from circumstances. In the Book of Five Rings, Musashi wrote lines that seem paradoxical. Do not have fixed preferences. Do not depend on any weapon. To an ordinary person, that sounds vague, but to Musashi, that was the foundation of all strength. When your ability only exists under ideal conditions, you actually do not have any real ability at all. Musashi understood that the enemy does not wait for you to be ready. The battle does not take place when you have had enough sleep, good food, and a comfortable spirit. It takes place when you are tired, when you lose focus, when things do not go according to plan. Therefore, he did not build strength by adding things, but by removing all dependence on conditions. He practiced with wooden swords, steel swords, One sword, two swords, even no sword at all. He fought in the rain, in the sun, in the cold, and while exhausted, not to become ascetic, but to ensure that no situation could render him powerless. His strength did not lie in individual techniques, but in the ability to act in any condition. The modern man realized that he lived completely oppositely. He only trained when there was a gym. He only focused when there was a quiet space. He only maintained discipline when his mood was good. His entire strength was supported by external factors. When those factors disappeared, he collapsed. So he began to apply the principle of removal. He did not seek perfect conditions. He removed the need for conditions. He did not wait for motivation. He removed negotiating with himself. Every action became so simple that there was no longer a reason to avoid it. When there was nothing left to cling to, he was forced to stand on his own 2 feet. And that is when a silent change occurred. Not immediately, not noisily, not dramatically, but as days passed, his mind learned a new lesson: act without needing emotion, and discipline without needing circumstances. It was in that starkness that the seed of true strength began to form. When Musashi spoke of strength, he did not separate the body from the mind. To him, a calm mind placed in a weak body was only an illusion. When the body could not endure pressure, the mind sooner or later would falter. Therefore, training the body was not to show off strength, but to create a foundation on which the mind could stand firm. That man began very small. In true Musashi spirit, no gym, no equipment, no perfect schedule, just his body and the ground. Each day, a minimum amount of training, not tied to any specific time or emotion. When he had the energy, he did more. When he was tired, he did less. But he set one rule he never broke: there would be no 0 days. The first few days passed by smoothly, even pleasantly, but very soon, his body started to resist. His muscles ached, his breathing grew heavy, the fatigue began to build up. This was the point where he used to stop, not because he could not go on, but because he did not like how it felt. This time, he did not try to avoid it. He simply kept going, within his limits, but never backward. Day by day, it was not just his physical endurance that changed. What was being reprogrammed was the relationship between his mind and discomfort. Every time he continued when he did not feel like it, his brain learned that fatigue was not a threat. Pain was no longer a signal to stop, but just neutral information. Eventually, training stopped being a decision that required thought. It became a reflex. His body automatically entered a state of action, the same way it automatically breathes. And as his body got used to enduring pressure, his mind also began to stop panicking when facing other challenges in life. It was here that Musashi's principle began to reveal its real power. When you train your body under all conditions, you are not just building muscle, you are removing the belief that you can only be strong when everything is going right. And when that belief disappears, both the body and the mind start to operate by a new standard, one that is stable and no longer easily broken. To Musashi, physical training was just preparation. What decided victory or defeat was not in the muscles, but in the moment the mind faced pressure. A strong body can still collapse if the mind reacts too quickly. So Musashi laid the foundation for a state he considered the core of all strength: an unmoving mind. He wrote that in a life or death moment, the mind must be like it is when drinking tea, not excited, not afraid, not rushed, not because the danger is gone, but because the mind is no longer pulled around by emotion. This is not about suppressing fear, it is about ending the need to react to it. That man began to realize that most of his suffering did not come from his circumstances, but from the mind's immediate reflexes. When stress appeared, he reacted with anxiety. When criticized, he reacted with defensiveness. When facing difficulty, he reacted by avoiding it. Every reaction happened before he could even notice it. He began training the way Musashi suggested, but applied to modern life. Every time discomfort arose, he did not try to change it, did not try to soothe himself, and did not run away. He stopped and observed. His heart beat faster, his breath grew shorter, his jaw clenched. He simply observed, without labeling it, without judging it. At first, this was nearly unbearable. His body kept sending signals that he had to do something: argue, walk away, or distract himself. But he did nothing. He let the feelings come and go on their own. Slowly, he realized an important truth: emotions do not destroy you. Your reactions are what make things spiral out of control. The first moment he truly felt the unmoving mind came in a familiar situation, a tense meeting. Sharp voices, pressure directed at him. In the past, his body would freeze and his mind would go blank. But this time, he could feel the wave of tension rise, yet he did not follow it. He kept speaking, slowly and clearly, as if nothing unusual was happening. No one else in the room understood what had just happened, but he did. For the first time, he was not being controlled by his surroundings from within. His mind stood still while everything else kept moving. And in that stillness, a new kind of strength was formed, quiet, unassuming, but incredibly difficult to break. Musashi understood that many people do not lose during the fight. They lose right after they think it is over. He observed swordsmen who defeated their opponents but then dropped their guard, only to be struck down in a moment of pride. From that, he defined the state that must be maintained after action as zanshin, a kind of alertness that is not tense but never absent. Zanshin is not hypervigilance or prolonged stress. It is the full presence of the mind, even when the action is complete. While most people relax and detach from the moment as soon as they finish something hard, zanshin asks you to stay just a bit longer, long enough to understand what just happened. That man realized this was one of his quiet weaknesses. Every time he finished a task, he immediately sought distraction. Every time he overcame pressure, he quickly rewarded himself and dropped his discipline. Every time he reached a goal, he let himself slide back into old habits, as if all his previous effort had only been a temporary phase. He began practicing zanshin in a simple but intentional way. After each workout, he did not collapse or rush to the next thing. He stood still for a few dozen seconds, breathed slowly, felt his heartbeat and fatigue. After intense conversations, he did not dive into his phone or try to forget. Instead, he gave himself a moment to recognize what had just happened inside him. Over time, he realized that these seemingly insignificant moments were where real strength was built. When the mind does not rush out of the experience, the lessons have time to sink in, mistakes are noted, stability is reinforced, and there is no room left for pride to take root. Musashi did not teach people to be tense all day. He taught them not to fall asleep in their own victory. Zanshin is the thread that connects action to growth. When you stay aware after each thing you do not need to learn the same lesson twice. And from there, the path forward becomes straighter, steadier, and harder to push back. Musashi did not view victory as the ultimate goal. To him, those who chase victory often act recklessly, revealing weakness through their ego. Instead, he taught a principle that sounds paradoxical: do not aim to win, aim not to lose. When you show no weakness, the opponent will eventually defeat themselves. In swordsmanship, that means keeping your guard tight, avoiding unnecessary strikes, never offering an opportunity. In life, it means not acting beyond your ability, not letting emotion drag you into reckless decisions. Strength does not come from doing more than others. It comes from not repeating your old mistakes. That man realized that most of his past failures had not come from a lack of skill, but from trying to prove himself. He spoke too much, promised too early, took risks he did not need, and traded stability for the feeling of being recognized. Each time, he created a crack in his own life. Applying Musashi's principle, he began to change his approach. He did not try to stand out, he tried to be solid. He showed up on time, delivered what he promised, and avoided creating unnecessary problems. He did not try to be the best in the room, he simply made sure he was not the one creating risk. Over time, this created a subtle but powerful advantage. While others pushed themselves into pressure with ambition and ego, he kept his life free of major weaknesses. When opportunities came, he was steady enough to take them. When crises hit, he did not collapse, because he was used to standing firm. Musashi was never undefeated because he always attacked. He was undefeated because he never revealed a weakness. And when that principle is applied to life, it teaches a simple but difficult lesson. You do not have to be better than others. You just have to stop defeating yourself before the battle even begins. After months of training, that man realized that the external challenges were no longer the greatest threat. What was hardest to face now was not pressure, fatigue, or failure, but the quiet fear that everything he had built might disappear if he stopped for just one day. That fear revealed that his ego was still deeply rooted. Musashi called the state that must be overcome at this level the letting go of ego. Not giving up responsibility or goals, but giving up the need to attach your identity to the results. When people tie their value to achievements, They live in constant anxiety. Every step forward comes with fear of loss. Every mistake becomes a threat to who they are. That man began to test a radical shift. He stopped counting the number of training days. He stopped celebrating milestones. He stopped seeking recognition from others. He kept doing what he had always done, but in silence. No one needed to know. No one needed to notice. What mattered was no longer the result, but the continuity of the practice. Over time, a strange kind of freedom emerged. When he no longer had to protect an image of himself, he also no longer feared losing it. Mistakes were no longer failures, they were simply part of the process. Success was no longer something to cling to, it was just the natural outcome of consistency. And it was then that his presence began to make others uncomfortable. Not because he acted superior, but because he no longer needed validation. In that silence, he unintentionally became a mirror, reflecting all the things others were still trying to avoid within themselves. Musashi believed that when the ego disappears, action becomes pure. A person no longer trains to become someone, they train because that is who they are. And when discipline is no longer an effort, but simply part of your nature, then there is nothing left to lose, and nothing left that can be taken from you. After many months, the transformation was no longer in what that man did, but in who he had become. He no longer had to remind himself to be disciplined, because discipline was no longer something he had to push for. It operated quietly, like breathing, without thinking, without debate. The weak parts that once held him back had been removed, bit by bit, until there was nothing left for them to hold on to. He no longer lived in a state of needing to prove anything to the world. The pressure did not disappear, but it no longer shook him. Failure was no longer a threat, it was simply a piece of information to process. When crisis appeared, he did not panic, and he did not try to comfort himself. He stood still, observed, and acted only when necessary. That stillness was not indifference, it was the sign of a foundation deep enough to hold firm. This was the state Musashi called the union of sword and meditation. No longer a gap between the training and the man, no longer a boundary between discipline and rest. Every action came from the same solid center. The person no longer tried to live rightly, they simply could not live any other way. Musashi died in poverty and solitude, no titles, no wealth, no successors, but he achieved something that very few people in history ever touch: complete mastery of the self. His final words were not about victory, not about glory, he simply said he had no regrets. The legacy he left behind was not in his undefeated record, but in the path he carved out. A path that requires no special talent, no perfect conditions, only the willingness to let go of everything non-essential. That path is not meant for the majority, not because it is too hard, but because it is too honest, and it offers no comfort. The final question is not how Musashi did it, the real question is, what will you do with what you just heard? Because from this moment on, you can no longer say that you do not know the path. And once the path becomes clear, the only thing left is to decide whether you have the courage to walk it. This path does not end here. It only ends for those who choose to return to the comfort of what is familiar. What you just heard is not a philosophy to reflect on, it is a brutal reminder that most people are not lacking ability. They are simply unwilling to give up what is making them weak. Day after day, Musashi did not leave behind a secret formula. He did not hand anyone motivation. He only pointed to a truth that very few are willing to accept. True strength appears when you stop negotiating with yourself. When action no longer depends on emotion, and when discipline becomes your nature instead of your effort. From this moment on, no one else can walk this path for you. You will either return to your old pace of life, keep making promises and delays, or you will begin the process of letting go. One habit, one dependency, one weakness you have allowed for far too long. No noise, no declarations, just quiet action. If something in this message struck a chord inside you, subscribe to the channel and stay. Not for entertainment, but to keep training your ability to stand firm when things are not going your way. And before you leave, drop a comment, not to impress anyone, but to make a commitment to yourself. What is the first weakness you are going to let go of? The narrow path is not for the majority, but if you are still here, chances are, you were never planning to be part of the majority anyway.